are where we'd normally be on a Friday. We're on the ledge. It's the Ontario Politics Podcast, but right now it's part of our daily offering. So we are in the Writ Race here in Ontario. Election Day is the second day of June. And so we are convening the crew on a daily basis. Certainly Monday to Friday will be in your inbox. And if you're listening to us in the On the Ledge feed, excellent. Feel free to leave us a comment or question that you might have, idea. When it comes to politics, there's no shortage of ideas and certainly opinion. Happy to do that. If you're listening in the Daily Brief feed, welcome in. And we'll scatter this through the Daily Brief feed as well. And there'll be other stories that'll come up that will drop back in there. But this is what you'll get right through until June the 2nd. All right, we're here with Keith Leslie, and John Wright is with us from Murru Public Opinion. And, I looked at some of the details that were released yesterday out on the hustings. And one of the things that really caught my eye was this whole question around the dental plan that Andrea Horwath had just unveiled. And everybody's looking at it and saying, how can we afford this? And I think the number was $680 million to stand it up, $380 million a year to maintain it. And I said on the morning roundtable on John Moore's show, well, if I were advising either the Liberals or the NDP, when the question came up, how are you going to fund this? I'd say, I have a great idea. We're going to actually make people pay for the sticker you put on your license plate. And that's about $2 billion a year. So we're going to be able to stand up a whole lot of things for $2 billion a year. And Keith, I know I'm just at the dentist. I know you had to make a dash yesterday, and we go there, and even if you've got a benefits plan, you have to pay up front before the insurance company kicks the check back to you. So you get a pretty good sense of how expensive dental care is, whether it's just a cleaning or something more complicated. If you look at the $120 Doug Ford gave back to you, and you aren't even living here anymore, for your license plate, that $120 doesn't go very far at the dentist's office in a year. But if you took all that money collectively, it helps pay for a program that's pretty robust, and I realize that they're going to do it in conjunction with the feds, but it's pretty robust in terms of what the NDP is offering. We're getting real value for that money.
Yes, value for that money, but neither certainly the Liberals, I'm not sure about the NDP, are willing to commit to putting that license sticker back on.
There you go.
License fee renewal. They don't, because yes, there's $1 billion to $2 billion revenue right off the bat that we know you would, and you wouldn't feel it again. You got your rebate checks, but going forward, you just pay it again. It wouldn't be any new paying sort of thing. They're not willing to do that because they know Doug Ford nailed it with that one. That's all there is to it. People really like that, and of course, it plays right directly to Ford's platform, to his base. Is exactly the kind of message he wants to send about making life more affordable. And of course, he's targeting almost all his message to drivers, to motorists, and this just works for it. So while funding a dental plan, and you know what, $680 million to set it up and $380 a year once you start getting some federal funding to help go along with it, that's not a lot of money for the amount you could save families. And the government counters, well, we already have that for people if you're on welfare supports. Otherwise, no. So let's get it for families. You get a couple of kids. Andrea Horwath had a very good point. You get a couple of kids that need braces. Boy, there goes a summer vacation, and maybe a lot more than that. I mean, it costs families more than they can afford. A proper dental care plan under OHIP. Even if it covers, as you say, some basics, fillings, cleanings, and braces to some degree, those sorts of things, non-cosmetic fixes, as they say. That would be huge for families. And yes, the license sticker fee will do it, but they're not going to do that. That's not going to be what pays for it. So they have to come up with some other idea that's just as catchy. And, what surprised me when Ford's out talking about this, day 2 of the campaign, he's out beside a giant license plate with "Get Her Done" on it. Like they have no shame about the license plate fiasco. Just none whatsoever. Don't forget that. Even though they're still on cars and they haven't even replaced them yet. So this is a government that's going to stick to its own messaging, get it done. They're smart. They're very calculated in this. And as I say, right away, the NDP and Liberals are like, well, no, I don't think we'll be bringing that back on those license fees. No.
But clearly, John, the message is we're going to give you a dental plan that only costs you $120 a year. It costs you $10 a month. Don't they start to have to frame these affordability issues like that to be able to say this is how we're going to pay for it?
Well, I took Andrew Horvath's commitment to be a little bit different. I mean, Ford has kind of got the commuter budget campaign, right? It's all about, saving money on gas and stickers and commuting and let's get you going on Go Train and there you go. So it's all about the commuters and all that stuff. And Andrew Horvath, I was interested that she made the announcement in Scarborough. She went in there and she also said it would be means tested. And it's aimed at a different constituency. It's aimed at a primarily urban constituency. It doesn't have a lot of money.
Well, still though, 90 to 200 grand was still that window that they were talking about for families. So it's not insignificant, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
It's not, but in the face of what the Ford government is bringing in, I mean, you do two things, and that's what Del Duca is doing. And it's kind of go, okay, well, we'll just cancel the highway. Lots of money there. Number two, it's a rounding error. I mean, honestly, it would be very interesting to see how much revenue is pouring into the government now that we're at almost $2 a liter. And, they get back to the House and all of a sudden, oh, my God, look at all the money we've got. We're awash in this and we're going to be able to balance the budget earlier because of all of this. I think at this stage in the campaign, Dave, people are not really paying attention to the details. A lot of it is just kind of a bunch of people out who are politicians doing politics, promising stuff that they don't even believe is going to happen. But what the three-party leaders are doing early on is establishing their own area where they're going to be talking about what's important to them. So they're each talking about different things and staking out their territory. And that's what I said yesterday. I mean, I don't think there's going to be kind of rope-a-dope. These guys have, except that these leaders have researched and figured out all of this stuff months ago. Like, it's not like they're doing it on the fly today. They've decided that they're going to do this, and they're going to lay it out in a very methodical way for the first week or so of the campaign to put it out there. I think it was by no mistake that Andrew Horvath announced this by going into where she did. She wants that area to know that she will represent them better than the Liberals will. And I think, if you go into other NDP ridings in Toronto, that's where this will resonate. But I don't think people are really listening to it at all.
Just as a programming note, there's going to be a Scarborough debate coming up on the 18th of May, and we will be in attendance that night. We'll just be able to bring you some of that flavor because, to John's point, Keith, the Scarborough is going to be an important part of the non-905 battle because it's going to be very competitive for both the Liberals and the NDP. And maybe, there's a shot in there for some Tories to kind of make some ground. So it'll be kind of this interesting microcosm of riding, 6 or so, that will be important to watch.
Well, as we know, Doug Ford certainly has gone out of his way to show Scarborough the love throughout his campaigns, his entire term in government. We're going to get Scarborough the subway. We know you've been ignored. I mean, he goes out there. I wanted to hold the Ford Nation rally out there. He knows that this area is in play and that, yes, if the Liberals and NDP, it's traditionally the area, he can make headway there for sure. One thing I've been watching, and John mentioned where Andrew Horvath went to do this, I've been watching where the leaders are, where they've been going this first week.
Yeah.
And, of course, it's always worth watching where the leaders are going, this is what the campaign's very telling. And, boy, are they sticking to the 416 and 905. I mean, it's basically you're either on the QEW or the 401 and you're not going too far. In part, that's to make sure the media can get out and cover you. And will get out and cover you. But in part, those are the ridings that we all know. We've talked about this many times, that this is where it's going to be won or lost. This is the real battleground. And we've seen from the latest polling that there's real movement in some of the 905 area. The Conservatives were doing really strongly. And the Liberals were coming on so strong into second that the Conservatives come out with an attack ad on Andrea Horvath. And you have to wonder if they're worried that the Liberals are coming on so strong the NDP is just going to fall. And the best case for the Conservatives, of course, is as close to a 50-50 battle between the NDP and Liberals as you can get. So they're focusing on Andrea Horvath, which I found very telling in the first week of the campaign. So as much as where they're going and who they're focusing on, we're right back to where we talked about. It's Durham, it's Oshawa, it's right through Brampton, Mississauga, Milton, Burlington, Hamilton, right around the 905, and that's where they've been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting as I watch this first week, kind of our partial week close, John. I wonder, what each party is actually running against. So, for example, if we went back to the whole idea of brand, and I think at one point we talked about how strong the Liberal brand is. I think Sabrina Nanji had talked about that in one of her editions of the Queen's Park Observer, and that brand has dropped over the last year or so, just in terms of the way the party's performed and attitudes towards the Prime Minister in Ottawa, etc. But if you were running against brand in this election, the opposition parties are running against the brand of Doug Ford more so than the Conservative brand, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, leaders are always the referendum question. It's rarely a case where it's, we want to defeat the Liberal Party and not mention the leader. So it is about Doug Ford. It is a referendum. Number two, it depends, though, Dave, on what you're actually running for. So Doug Ford is running to expand how many seats he has. He wants to take it from the low 60s to the, higher or mid or higher 70s. That's kind of the objective of the campaign. You want 4 more years. You want to diminish the opposition, and you want to keep the Liberals below party status. There you go. That's a nice kind of bucket right there. What is Stephen Del Duca doing? Well, he's trying to get a seat, trying to come alive, trying to get a few more seats so he can have party status and get the money from the ledge. And he's going to try and build for the next election campaign. So their party is looking 226, not this one, and trying to diminish Andrea Horwath so she'll go away and, maybe the Liberals will take official opposition status. Mike Schreiner, he's just trying to survive. But Andrea Horwath is an interesting one because she's trying to hold on to that opposition position. And you got to think after 4 times, this is it. They got to get some new blood because I don't know how they can continue if she is diminished in any way in this election campaign. So it's not so much running against the brand. I find that Stephen Del Duca is not known by many in the electorate at all, but he's already sitting at 30% in the polls. And people are saying that's a brand that they are comfortable with, particularly in the 905. That's just fine. And particularly because they voted Liberal last time, even though, there's a bit of an overlap with Ford's numbers in his votes. But that seems to be the game plan at the moment. So it's more running towards a certain set of objectives as opposed to running just against a party to get more votes.
Yeah, I just wondered whether or not the Liberal vote, though, is really about the party and not Del Duca, right? It's the what's sticking there is a consistency to the brand, the Liberal brand, because nobody knows much about Del Duca, and those who do are kind of, I don't know about this guy.
No, I don't disagree with that assessment. I think what Doug Ford is a little bit different than leaders that I've seen is because his own personal brand transcends even the Conservative vote.
Yeah, agreed.
You and I, the three of us know because of the Toronto mayoralty circumstance and the Ford brothers and how they did things, that they actually have such a loyal following that there are overlapped voters there. They're loyal to the Fords, probably about 15% of their actual full amount that would be voting for the Conservatives are made up of people, and 15 percentage points, who come from just below the 905 in that outer ring of Toronto and then just above it. Kind of rare. You don't see that very often where you've got a personal brand that transcends the party. But again, that's the power of the Ford brand inside the city of Toronto that gives them that great base to move from. And, Del Duca is going to have a very hard time defeating them in the brand area. But in the 905, I think he can still do not too badly.
I wanted to say there was an excellent Canadian Press article this morning that compared the policies and platforms that we have so far from the parties. And I looked at actually, and this is where the NDP and Liberals are going to have trouble, differentiating themselves for voters because it looked at the similarities between the two, and not just in education, class sizes, that sort of thing, public education. Both parties pledged to cancel Highway 413, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, expand the protected green belt, rebates for electric vehicles, plant millions of trees, expand or eliminate for-profit long-term care, raise personal support worker wages, repeal Bill 124, the 1% wage cap. They also both say they'd appoint a minister for anti-racism, implement the Pay Transparency Act, legislate 10 paid sick days, boost the minimum wage, allow gig workers to be classified as employees, amongst other items. Those are some pretty core things. what voters like a lot of those, where are they supposed to go? They're going to go, as you say, are they going to stick with that NDP leader they've seen who through 3 previous elections? This is their 4th one. Or are they going to look at the Liberals and go, that's the brand that really, we know that the 1918 or the 2018 election was an aberration, and the Liberals will be back to official party status at a minimum. So are they looking, where those sorts of similarities? I don't see how the Liberals and NDP can differentiate themselves. Their policy differences are slight in some areas, and that many similarities or almost identical policies is just going to enable Ford to steamroll right through with Ford Nation. That's the brand, not progressive conservative.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think, again, you go back to what are they fighting over, the NDP and the Liberals at this stage? I mean, part of it is the survival of a leader, the other is the survival of a party, right? Like that's you want to deal with those things. But we know that at a certain point in this campaign, in the back part of it, it's going to be both the NDP and the Liberals saying, vote for us because we can stop that guy. You know that that's coming. The second thing is it's a very interesting political dynamic that goes on between those two parties now, because it started in Kathleen Wynne's team as well, who then went to Ottawa and did the same thing. And that is, we'll just tack as far left as we can, and we'll just get the NDP and the Liberals together. So you can't tell them apart, but you'll vote for us because we hold the stage more often than those guys. So, I mean, it's a very calculated risk in some ways because you get bundled up with the other party, but it's part of the strategy that apparently they've implemented over the last number of years. And that's why we have what we have federally. So I think that it comes down to, did you ever see The Candidate, the movie The Candidate with Robert Redford? Anybody listening on this, you got to go and watch it. It's so accurate to the early 1980s anyways. There's an interesting scene at the end of, there's 2 interesting scenes. One is where Robert Redford is a candidate. They say basically you can say and do whatever you want on the campaign trail because you're going to lose. Like, just go ahead and do it. And the last scene is, the spoiler, is where he's sitting on the bed in the hotel room. And they're trying to get in to interview him because he's won. And he turns to the campaign manager, it's the last line in it, and says, what do we do now? I mean, there's a sense among these parties that they know what they are trying to achieve. And if one of them, I think Bob Ray had that circumstance in 1990 when he got off the plane in Thunder Bay and saw the poll and said, you're going to win. It's kind of like, you got to be kidding me. What do you do once you win? I think there's an expectation that the Liberals will not win this campaign. And that if they do, it's going to be a big surprise, and they're going to be left in the hotel bed going, what do we do next? Because there won't be the whole sense of transition team and all of that sort of stuff. So again, I'm watching these folks in terms of the small p politics of them, keeping their platform alive and doing the small things as opposed to swinging for the fences, right? Like, I don't see that yet. And it may be that it's just the Liberals want to be a little more incremental and that they think it's a 2-step campaign.
Mm-hmm. Is their leader a hindrance? Is Mr. Del Duca himself?
Well, there's a good question.
Them?
Right?
Like the Liberal brand is popular, the party's rising, but they seem to be, keeping the leader very low profile. Not only no media buzz, he's just riding around in a small van. This is not a Liberal campaign of old where you would have his face plastered on a bus. And more than one person said to me, there's a reason they don't have his face plastered on a bus. Well,
I'm agreeing with you guys so much today. I think, first of all, I think it was when I last looked at the approval ratings, only 28% admitted to knowing who he was. I mean, it's not like a lot of people. You do the prompted, so you do an open-ended, who is the Liberal leader, and if you know him, you get approval, and then you kind of say, well, Stephen Del Duca is. What do you think? And then you see the gap between the two. So not many people know him. Secondly, he is carrying a huge amount of baggage. It's really easy to, for the Conservatives to sort of say, there's the Wynne Del Duca team, and he was the transportation minister, and he brought you all these costs and the big deficit, blah blah blah. There's all of that. But also, I think there's a visceral reaction when you see him. And it's, you hate to say this but politics is all about presentation and who you look like and who you are in your department. It is all about that. He's got some growing into that. I mean, this is Mr. Horn-rimmed glasses for the longest time, and now he's Mr. Contacts, and so they're clearly, it's all about politics and presentation. Again, Keith, I think you got to come back to this and say, he's not being presented as much as he could be. It's still early days. But if the objective is to get him somewhat known, at least in the debate or debates, and at least to, get into a seat and official party status, then you're swinging for the infield now and maybe for the fences next time. And that it may not be bothering them as much, but that's my sense of what this is all about at the moment.
So put this in perspective, because as far as a lot of polling, obviously, has been released prior to, during, and even in the last 4 or 5 days as we've got ready into this campaign. I realize that everybody's got different methodologies, but I think it's important for folks to understand exactly what we're looking at when we're looking at, first of all, a horse race number. But I think when I've watched you over the last, long time, we've been known each other and talked about this stuff. The important question is not necessarily who you're going to vote for right now. I think it's a snapshot and so on. You've been able to sort of trend things based on voter attitudes, and it more or less comes back to what we were talking about earlier: is, are you talking to me? I mean, to Keith's point, that is, you're messaging me when you put that $120 check on the table for me. So where does those two things fall or overlap or, inform one another in terms of polling?
So again, I've done so many of these polls that it all kinds of blends into, you get a sense of the body politic and it goes through this. And most pollsters got it wrong during that interregnum time when they had some issues with their panels, like in 212 to 215. It's Keith and Dave, you know what it's like. Well, we would get an Angus Reid or an Ipsos poll, and it would be bang on, and we'd go, there you go. It's all, and then for about 4 years, it was like, oh my God, I'm on national television. We just blew it, completely. I mean, it's a little embarrassing, but we figured out what it was all about, and then you kind of, make your way forward again. So that's all being figured out. But there's a few things that you realize that happens over these election campaigns. Number one, we aren't seeing any change in the numbers. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to talk about polling, every day, because what's moving? Nothing. Mm-hmm. Number two, there's only one area really to look at, and that's the 905. And your sample sizes are ridiculously small anyways, unless you're going to do a 1,200 sample in the circle. You're working with maybe, 200 or 300 people, and you're seeing the numbers go up and down. Oh, they're in the lead by 5 points. Oh, they're down by 10. You get a directional sense of where things are going. But normally what happens in a campaign is that no one is paying attention at this stage. Just kind of going about their business. They're worried about what's on their doorstep and on their, in their gas tank and on their table. But there comes a point, usually about 10 or 12 days before the end of the campaign, where there's a hard stare. And you guys have been on the campaign trail, and you realize that it's close to the debate. There's about a third who have already made up their mind. There'll be a third who make up their mind kind of quasi over, before the debate. And then there's a hard stare where that final group kind of lock in at you. And we used to say that if you had a federal election campaign on a Monday after Thanksgiving, everybody would show up at the dinner table and they would talk about it and then come to a deliberative judgment on Monday, and then you'd vote. And it would be that. But in provincial politics, what I've always found is about 10 days to 2 weeks before, all of a sudden everybody clicks in. And it's just this hard stare for a couple of days, and it's either going to drop or it's going to stay as it is until the end of it. And we're not there yet. People are just not paying attention to it at the moment. So as we see all of these polls being released, all from credible firms, all who have great and different methodologies, all with people who have been in this game for a long time, you've got, Nick Nanos, who's up a couple of points. You've got Daryl at Ipsos, who's down a couple of points, or they're up this way. It's a couple of points. It's within the margin. We're not really seeing any movement at all because people are not tuned in. So the polls are great. The aggregation that you can go and find on, 338 Canada, all worthwhile taking a look at. I'll look at the last 2 weeks. That's when, we'll all bear down and see whether this thing is going to yield a change in direction. And right now there's nothing.
Well, Keith, the corollary to that in the war room, they're not necessarily looking at who would win a vote today, because today we're not voting. But what they're looking at is what's resonating to make sure that on 10 days out, we are pushing the right emotional button so that long stare, as John puts it, turns into okay, I've made eye contact and you're my guy.
They're trying to get a little momentum, if anything, at this point. And it's hard to measure, as John says, because the sample sizes are way too small. but it's also hard to get people's attention. And this is, I was going to pose the question to John, will people lock in that last 10 days if the Leafs are still in the playoffs? Because there's,
no, seriously,
this is a
that's
really
a
good
question.
distraction. And all we're seeing is what happens is the election ads are annoying as hell in the hockey games. This is what happens. People start getting put up. So I'm just curious. I mean, is there a danger of them actually, having too much of a presence during the playoffs? But they have no choice. I mean, the election campaign is set. This is when they're going to do it. So I'm sort of tongue in cheek, but sort of serious here as well, that a lot of people just aren't going to want to engage. The weather's just starting to get nice. Next week's going to hit into the 20s. People are going to want to start getting outside and, not just to put up a lawn sign.
Right, and that does happen, and we're moving. It happened in the last campaign where it wasn't until the last week and a half or so when people, resolutely said it's going to be Doug Ford. But there's a couple of things that people like us have been around a long time. There's a different type of campaign now, and it's called social media. I mean, we go back to 2007 when the iPhone was invented. Hello, 2007, not 1952, but just a short while ago. And everything now is about Facebook and running. The campaign that is above the ground is not the campaign that's being run. It's below the ground. It's on social media. We're not seeing it. It's chugging out day after day. It's targeting people. It is a mass. There are rooms in this city that I've been in that look like Mission Control from 1969. I mean, there's nothing but, everybody's focused on getting the message to certain areas of the province. Okay, from the polling point of view, there's three big polls that you do. One poll is probably a few months ago. It might be a 6,000 to 7,000, maybe an 8,000 sample. And you go through and it's tied down to the ridings. And you're going to carve out of that the ridings where you think you've got swing. And so when we put out polls that say 39, 37, whatever, they're not looking at those polls. They don't care about those polls.
Right.
Because they're looking at the 30 ridings that they really want. And for them, in their calculations, they're seeing not 37, they're seeing a 42. They're seeing it very differently than we are. So they will have done one probably a couple months ago. They'll do one maybe again now, but they'll do one before the end of the campaign. But the rest of it is nightly trackers. And you're into ridings and you're into your panel and you're going a unique group of people maybe every night or every 2 nights. And that is what they are looking at. So they will be heavily invested in the 905. They will be heavily invested in those areas. Maybe the Tories are in the north now because of the promises that they've made, and they think they can knock off some of the NDP. But they don't look at our polls. They don't look at people above the eyebrows. They don't look at television ads, although if they're in trouble, they'll use radio ads. But it's all below the surface, and it's a knife fight. It really is. And who's got the most money? It's the Tories. I mean, without a doubt. So I suspect that people are not really seeing them when the Leafs are going to be on, but if they're on Facebook the next day talking about the Leafs, they're going to see lots of it.
And the PCs have brought back their own media crew, right? Doug showed up this week. The PCs, it's not Ontario News Now or whatever they called it before, but they have brought back their media crew to do their own, just jump right over the media and post their own videos.
You know what I thought was interesting, Keith, is that I love watching how they set up those bus tours. And what I noticed was it's not so much packing the hall anymore. I mean, even post-COVID, that would be a bit risky. But when the premier steps off the bus now, you don't necessarily see the crowd, but you sure hear the applause. It's a very interesting way of setting this up. And a lot of it is, seeing how the leaders are portraying themselves, either among a certain group of people or with the backdrop of people. It's very, very stage managed. But we all have to remember, as you in the media know, it's not the tour that used to be. I mean, it's like one camera, which is a pool recording stuff, which everybody gets the same stuff. And then you stand up from Queen's Park or something with it in the background. And it's a way different campaign and a way different feel to it. And that's why I think, come about 2015, everybody started to get into the social media campaign, which is below the surface of what we're seeing. And it's hard to keep, your finger on the pulse then. But the polls, in fact, regardless of that, have managed to pick up in the last 10 days where this is all going to end up. So, it's all below ground now, but it's going to come back up around that time after the debate.
Just on the media note, Colleen Ryan is the vice president at Sussex Strategy Group. She's going to join us tomorrow to talk about that very thing. And I know you and I talked to Brett James at Sussex back in the federal campaign, and he described, how micro-focused the campaigns can be using social media. And more to the point where your social media, you think you're going to Facebook or whatever to learn about the campaign. Your behavior informs the parties just as much or more in terms of what it is you really want from them, and that they can really target that. So we're going to have a chat with her tomorrow and just kind of dig in a little bit more on that. And just a final note on the possibility of the Leafs overlapping with the campaign. And I don't want to get over my skis too far here, but you know what, Keith? I would take the election ads over the betting ads. You seen all these the legalized betting ads? Oh my God! Can we not?
2 of those casino ad companies were fined this week by the Ontario government for false claims in those ads.
Well, it's also interesting where they've amped up their offer and enticing people at a time when, in fact, we're desperate for money. I mean, and everybody out there is playing. I mean, it's one thing to put $20 down on the Blue Jay, 2 for 1. It's another thing to go online and be offered a matching $200 to gamble. And this is money which nowadays you got a choice. You can either gamble it or you can drive a car. Take your pick.
John Wright, Keith Leslie, thanks for joining us. Enjoy your weekends, guys, and we'll be back at it on Monday. Tomorrow, Colleen Ryan from Sussex Strategy Group will be here on the Writ Race. So similar to the way, I think we're going to talk about some of the polling questions and that kind of thing. What you're not going to get here is sort of the day-by-day who was zooming who out on the campaign trail. We do want to get into some of the issues, more of the 100,000-foot view, but with a Hawkeye lens on some of this stuff. So, again, if you've got the question or there's something coming up in your part of the province that you think we should be talking about, by all means, let us know. You can find me on social media at Dave Trafford. That will get to me on Instagram, Facebook, and on Twitter, and we'd be happy to engage. And I think this whole Scarborough question is going to be a really interesting microcosm debate in terms of what's going on in so many parts of the province. It's competitive, and it will speak loudly about, I think, the strategies overall as we head to that critical point, as John points out, 10 days out from the campaign. And that just happens to be May the 18th is the time that they're going to have this debate discussion. So we're pretty close to that window. So we'll get a flavor of what's going on there. And if it's happening in your part of the province, let us know, and we'd be happy to put an ear on that too and get down in the weeds with you on it. That'll do it. This is the Writ Race, the Ontario Politics Podcast, produced for Story Studio Network. I'm Dave Trafford. We'll talk to you tomorrow.